Hello, audience. Welcome to the 2020 series presented by the New York Film Academy. The 2020 series are conversations with creative visionaries about craft, creativity, and collaboration. So we're going to do 20 minutes of craft talk and then 20 minutes of answering questions from you guys, the global audience. So this is your time to speak to a seminal storyteller who I'm like such a fangirl of, and I would love to present Harry Yoon, amazing editor who I am so grateful that is coming here today. Hi, Harry.
Hi, Liz. Happy to be here.
Yay, we can hear and see each other. Bravo, look at Zoom.
Awesome.
So, the classic idea is that the film's written 3 times. You write the film's directed, it's been rewritten in the direction, and then it's rewritten in the edit. When do you start on a new project? When do you come in with your creativity? At what point are you asked, what do you think? How should the edit be?
Yeah, I think in both television and film, but especially in feature film, you begin that dialogue with the director at the script stage. And so that's how you're usually introduced to the project. And how you respond to the script and how you're able to talk about it is actually part of the interview process. And so, one of the things I'm careful to do is to read, as if I'm just an audience member for the first time, and then to kind of go back and look at the script and then take some detailed notes, especially questions that I have, initial impressions, things that confuse me, or transitions that I'm a little bit concerned about, or something I'm just wondering cinematically, how are we going to communicate this? Like in particular, like a character's thought process, for example, which is so easy to write, but is so hard to convey. And so those are the questions that I bring to bear in the interview. And usually the director or the writer really appreciates that you've been engaging with the material like that. And as long as you're able to ask questions in a way that doesn't feel like an overt critique or something, more of like advocating for what the audience might understand or doesn't understand, they immediately start to see you as a collaborator in helping to tell their story. And so that's usually where that dialogue and that collaboration begins.
So where does the essence of style come in? Because if you look at, say, you edited Euphoria and you edited Minari, totally different styles, long takes in Minari, not a lot of editing going on. Euphoria is like, maybe not cutty as much, but it's a moving camera and waking the audience up with a cut or with a change of angle. Where does that come in the conversation? Because it seems so both are very heavily styled in their own ways, let's say.
Absolutely. And I think a lot of that comes also in the initial interview. And then as you're starting to look at dailies too. So in the initial interview, there's always comps or references that the director or the showrunner has saying like, I really love this show. I kind of want to evoke this type of music. And I think that that's one of the reasons why I tell up and coming editors, you have to be as much a filmmaker as you are an editor. So you have to consume, you have to sort of be literate in film history, for example, right? So that when someone talks about Tarkovsky, you have some sense of like what that means. Or you can, as part of your interview, as part of your discussion, you can say like, oh, this reminded me a lot of this particular filmmaker. Like when I read Minari for the first time, it really evoked a lot of Hirokazu Koreeda for me. And so when I was able to sort of talk about that kind of reference with Isaac, that immediately put him at ease because he understood the kind of universe of style that we were talking about. Whereas, one of the benefits of working in television is that sometimes you have a pilot, and the pilot, which was so brilliant and brilliantly edited by my friend Julio Perez, served as a reference to say like, this is the kind of kinetic style, one that's grounded in a subjective experience, particularly of Rue's manic nature, that we want to convey on screen. And this is part of the engine that drives this storytelling. And so you're constantly talking about other films, other TV shows, and things like that. So it's really, really important that you have a kind of cultural literacy when you start working.
But then where would the newness of a style or for a show come from if we're iterating from other past work?
It's great. I think, you're always building on the shoulders of giants. I think the newness comes from the synthesis of, I think, someone's voice giving a different turn on a particular thing. So, long takes, for example, with ground level cinematography is not something new to Asian or Asian American cinema, for example. Like if you watch any Ozu film, like, that there's a lot of like longer takes shooting through proscenium doorways and things like that. And so it's not like Isaac invented that, but to see a very particular story, a very particular relationship, those are the kinds of things that I think bring a freshness to the grammar that we're all familiar with. And also, I think once you're grounded and I feel like your audience starts to trust you with, feeling engaged with the characters, you're given more leeway to kind of experiment, right? To kind of push the envelope a little bit. And so that's where that sort of back and forth trial and error as you're going through editorial comes into play. Like you're saying, well, why don't we throw in a dash of this or try that? And then, that sort of back and forth is what makes it really fun.
We were discussing for a minute, but we did when we were talking before about how you create teams or how you join teams and how different it is on a feature than on TV. And I would love to understand that, especially for the editors out there, of like what to expect if they're going on a film as opposed to a TV series.
Absolutely. One of the best things about being on a feature is that you are, as an editor, a department head. And so you're kind of on your own and you're determining where your department lives, how it operates, who it interfaces with. So, a first assistant, for example, on a feature has to literally find and set up the cutting room, literally find and set up the machines and things like that. And you're interfacing with the lab and all of that. And as an editor, you're also walking through from production all the way through the end of color and mix and all of that. You're acting as a kind of guide and translator and as a kind of ambassador for post-production for your director. What's wonderful about television, though, is that a lot of those kind of ancillary coordinating and organizing services are done by a team, because you're not just making one story, you're literally making like 8 to 22 mini features over the course of a season. So you have to have like a huge team taking care of like all the coordination and things like that. And so one of the pleasures of working in television is that you may not be touching as much of the process or leading as much of the process, but you're part of a community. So often on most TV shows, you have 3 editors and 3 assistants. And so, that's 5 times as many kind of creative minds or, personalities to enjoy while you're working in the process. To invite into your cutting room to like look at a cut or to ask advice or to be inspired by in terms of the work that they're doing. And I find pleasure in both. I find tremendous pleasure in the kind of teamwork and camaraderie of television, and tremendous pleasure in sort of being a little bit more of the ambassador or the boss in feature films.
So then what was it like going on to a Marvel feature, which is like really muscling in there?
It's so funny because it's a little bit of both worlds. So on Shang-Chi, we had 3 editors. I mean, there wasn't, we weren't all together all the time. Elizabeth Ronald's daughter and Nat Sanders started during production. Elizabeth finished at the end of director's cut and I took over for her. And so then it was Nat and I all the way to the end. And so I got that teamwork aspect, which was really fun. And because there's such big visual effects heavy productions, we had like this huge ancillary team of visual effects editors, coordinators, producers, supervisors, etc., that we were interfacing with on a regular basis. For example, my assistant team on Minari was just one person, the amazing Irene Chun. And then on Shang-Chi, it was, I think, 8 people. So like, it was like a huge team. We're all kind of like moving the football down the field. And so it was a little bit of both. So you're both kind of involved in every aspect, but you're also, a part of a much bigger community that's trying to handle the kind of unwieldy level of work that's involved in doing something that big.
Is it still like on a big Marvel feature? Is it still come down to like basic storytelling and character development? Does it really come to, I mean, this is my mind and, my thoughts of how you have to centralize it in that, otherwise it just might go off the rails and in floaty land.
No, that's absolutely true. And I think, one of the things I found as being incredibly, you know, uh, gratifying and, and made sense to me because I'm a big fan of the MCU and their storytelling is everything is in the service of story.
Mm.
If character development could be stronger, if the story could be like 1 to 2% better, they'll throw out like, an ungodly amount in terms of dollars of visual effects work or move this scene around or change this concept. Like, I think that's why their movies can be so satisfying on multiple levels, is that everything is in the service of story. And every week we had a meeting with the core, brain trust of Marvel, who, they're called the trio. So it's like Kevin Feige, Louis Desposito, and Victoria Alonso. And so much of our discussion was not about logistics or schedule. It was about story. Do we care about Shang-Chi? Do we understand his relationship to Katie, who's Aquafina's character? How much more nuanced could the relationship with Wenwu or Tony Leung's character be? Are we telling that story? Can we do it like 3% better if we add this scene? And so it was very much centered in that way. And story was the number 1, 2, and 3 priority.
Are you at any time consulted early on with like, here's the shot, and even on the smaller projects, or like, here's the shot list, this is what we're thinking of shooting. Are we missing? What's your point of view? Is that happen?
Absolutely. Even early on when I was cutting shorts, directors would say, here's a shot list. And I have to admit, like back then I was like, it looks okay to me. Like, I think like when you're starting out, like you don't really know, like, you're like, okay, there's a wide, there's some coverage, fine. But I think as you cut hundreds, if not thousands of scenes, you start to kind of understand like, this feels like overkill for what we're doing here. Or I wonder if you need something more dynamic, especially for a blocking change that might happen here. Like, I think there's a way that you start to expect certain things from the camera. And it's so funny, if you put a fly on the wall camera and if you ever watch an editor watching dailies, you'll often hear them talking or yelling at the screen. They're like, no, don't move the camera here. Or like they're like literally saying like, where's my close-up? Oh my God, give me a single, like there's stuff that you start to develop this sort of sixth sense of what you're going to need to bridge certain things, to shorten certain things, to pivot on a particular reaction, that type of thing. And so I think, often, even on bigger films and things like that, you're sometimes consulted in terms of your opinion as far as what might be necessary.
As opposed to just receiving the footage, I suppose, like, and here you go.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't always work that way. I think primarily on independent productions and things like that, when you have to make your day every day, when you have to do an ungodly number of setups in order to wrap out of a location in a day, like, I think that kind of mind meld, that kind of collaborative thinking as far as how efficient can we be, is something that you're invited to participate in. Often on bigger shows, there's so much work and craziness going on. I mean, you're usually less involved in those discussions, but it's always, that's why I say again that it's so important for editors to be filmmakers, to sort of think the way that directors think, the way that DPs think.
And before we were going to look at the scene from Euphoria, but how do you get a scene? How do you crack it?
The most important question I ask myself at the beginning, and actually it's often as I'm watching dailies, like there's a kind of silent dialogue that I have with dailies. And that's why I like to string out dailies into one long, what I call a string out roll or a chem roll. Chem is a reference to a really old analog editing system in which you had to sort of string things out on a reel. I like to do it that way because after a take is done, there's often kind of like sometimes a tail slate, there's a slate at the beginning. And it's in that time that I can actually ask myself questions of like, okay, what did I just see? What was the most important part of that? What performance do I think is going to be really pivotal in that? How does that relate to my understanding of what the purpose of this scene is? Often I have the whole script printed out as one long continuity, and I print it out on my wall, and I look and I'm like, okay, what's the context that this scene is in? Okay, she's just left her drug dealer's house. She's heading to this place. It's kind of in the first act versus in the second act, for example, right? Like, and I'm starting to think of like, what's the critical information I need to know here? What's the most important thing? And if you keep that in mind, it really helps you to hone in on what coverage, what shots, what pacing is going to be absolutely necessary and no more in order to cut this scene. The mistake that I used to do is, when I was a beginning editor, was to just watch everything and be neutral about everything and say, oh, that's a great look in the wide shot, or oh, that's a great performance or a great read in this two shot. And then at the end of it, I would just have a bunch of selects and not know the strategy of how to use them.
Right.
But if you're asking that question, what is the purpose of this scene? What is the purpose of the performance and the character arc within the context of the story being told? Then I think it's easier to come up with a plan of attack.
And have you had times where you had to like revise that, to actually crack the,
Every time. I mean, that's what's so wonderful about the process, is that I don't think anybody has 100% knowledge of what you're going to get at the end of a scene, at the end of a sequence, at the end of a cut, right? Like, that's why one of the worst experiences for a director is to watch the editor's cut, because all they're seeing is, oh my God, we didn't get that. Oh man, so much slower than I expected. Or, oh my God, I hate that actor so much. There's
100%.
They're bringing everything they remember about production into that room, and all they see are the problems, right? And thankfully, you have less of that exposure. And so like you sort of nurse them back to health and say, okay, let's start again. Let's look at this as if you never were part of production, and let's sort of like rework everything with that in mind. And that's what the editorial process is about. And that's why it's so fun, is that you're reimagining the movie for the first time, as hopefully advocating for the audience, because that's what they're doing. Like, they weren't there at the script writing stage. They weren't there during production. They don't care how long it took for you to get that shot. They just know that shot's boring, So like, I think you're that sort of newness and having to start fresh with the kind of beginner's mind is what's so fun about editorial.
So let's look at this Euphoria scene and just set it up. Like, did you know you were going to cut it in this way before you cut it, or was that a plan? Or
yeah, I think, referring back to what I said earlier, is like one of the things that Sam really wanted to explore in this particular episode was, giving a cinematic evocation of Rue's bipolar nature. And so we're very much in her manic phase. And then, this is before we kind of hit a wall and go into her sort of depressive phase. And so we knew that this was going to be frenetic. It was supposed to be fun. It was styled after, noir sort of detective films and things like that. And, Zendaya, as you can see in this performance, is so incredible, having so much fun with it. And that's what informed our cutting.
Awesome. All right, Charlie, shall we hit it, please?
This whole thing is beyond logic. Love. Jules is in love with Nate.
Why would Jules be in love with Nate?
Oh, you should listen to me.
Bennett, the cigarettes are killing me.
Listen. The night at the carnival, she said she wanted to go meet up with this guy she met online. Okay, he's some fucking jock. He's from a conservative family, and they were talking and texting. They've been texting for weeks. And when I say texting, I don't just mean regular fucking texting. They were sexting.
Like nudes?
Yeah. Side note, very nice dick, very clean room.
Oh.
She never fucking saw his face.
Yeah, so Jules was catfished.
No, hear me out. So the night at the carnival, she made plans with this guy to meet up with him at the lake, okay? I fucking go home. Next thing I know, she's fucking knocking at my window. She's all emotional. She got fucking tears in her eyes. I say, Jules, what the fuck happened? She looks at me, she goes, didn't look like his pictures.
Yeah, that's like the definition of catfishing.
Oh, but you know what his name was?
Nate Jacobs?
Tyler.
Like Tyler Clarkson?
You goddamn right. Maddie is 17, Tyler's 22, and they fornicated.
Statutory.
Yeah, you saw it, I saw, we all fucking saw it.
Including Nate.
And what is a lighter offense than statutory?
Assault.
Bingo.
Rue, are you pouring coffee in the water filter?
Yes, I am.
Instead of water?
Yes, I am.
Well, please don't do that. And it's late. You shouldn't be drinking caffeine.
Mom, please. I have homework.
Well, there's a sentence I never thought I'd hear.
Will you let me know when this is ready?
Hello?
Howard, it's Bennett.
2:45 in the morning. Don't you ever sleep?
Listen. Why would Nate single out Jules in the first place? It's obvious he was sexually attracted to her. And because Jules is predominantly het, okay? He wooed her with his fucking creepy jock magic shit. She's super fucking sensitive. She's very forgiving, and she's basically the most wonderful fucking person on the planet. She fell for him. That's why she fucking testified. I'm a genius. I'm a fucking genius. Hey, Mom! I'm a fucking genius! I'm not even tired. It's crazy. I'm not even fucking tired. I feel amazing.
I'll be honest with you, Bennett. You're too close to this case.
Okay, we can stop it there.
Who was that?
Oh my God, that is so satisfying as a viewer to watch. Like the cuts are just so snappy and satisfying.
Yeah, that's so fun.
Music, was that, how did that come about? Because that was really perfect and felt modern at the same time.
You know, it was one of the hallmarks of the style that Julio developed for the pilot, and one that we, you know, it definitely added a layer of work, but as Liz, as you said, like it's deeply satisfying when it kind of like is so specific and, you know, rhythmic. And so what Labyrinth, our sort of genius composer, would do is that he wouldn't just send us cues. He would send us sometimes like different sketches of stuff, and then he'd give us all of the splits. So, you know, the percussion, all the different types of percussion, like snaps, you know, synths, horns, you name it. And what we would do is we would, you know, take some of that stuff and then music edit to craft it so that it melded in a much more integrated way with our cut. And we could sort of like evolve it as our cut evolved as well. And so by the end, he had, you know, he'd kind of given us a tool set to take his stuff and really kind of like form-fittingly put it into what we were doing. And so, you know, it was a lot of extra work, but you know, ultimately it's sort of like, I think one of the reasons that, you know, I think that the show felt so specific. And so, you know, like there wasn't a separation between where music ended and the editing began. And so that's what made it fun.
That's interesting. And in that one, were these sort of like the little like cutaway pieces, did you find them in the footage, or were they purposefully like jump cut it?
There was a variety of stuff. Like for example, in the bathroom, there's kind of like time shifting going on, but there are big gestures which feel rhythmically right for that moment. Like it's almost like instead of doing like what would be like a drum hit, you know, to emphasize a joke or something like that, I found like a great like match strike. And so understanding rhythmically, musically, what I wanted the cut to feel like, I just looked for footage that could serve that role, that rhythmic role. And I think that's what made it really fun, and sort of fracturing her performance, but not in such a way where you felt lost geographically. Like you always knew the physical relationship to the characters. Like you never sort of broke eye line, for example, and then moved them around in a way where the audience was like, wait, where is that? But you took liberties in terms of like time jumping and things like that, using big gestures to emphasize cuts, which helps the smoothness of things. So yeah, using a variety of techniques to give it that energy and that verve without losing your audience.
Yeah, it was
Yeah.
really fantastic.
Awesome.
And do you have, just out of curiosity, do you have a music background at all?
My mom forced me to take piano lessons when I was young, and I'm so grateful. She was always like, "You're going to be grateful for this," and I totally am. Like, I think that just gave me an early exposure to things like rhythm and meter, dissonance, concordance, things like that. And I did a lot of like singing all the way up through college. I was like in an a
Wow.
cappella group, and so I think definitely sort of blend and harmony and things like that, especially tension in music is something that I played around with and practiced a lot. And I think it's really, really important for editors to have that musical sense because, I mean, there has to be a kind of internal logic that you have to know when a good cut is or when a good, even in a performance, even when somebody's crying. So I think it's very, very helpful to be passionate about music.
Oh, 100%. I think the best editors have some type of music aficionado or background because there's a tempo, there's a zip to it. We have a million questions. So I am going to jump in here and curate a little bit. And okay, Max asks, what was your favorite or alternatively the most emotionally challenging scene you found to edit on Minari?
My favorite scene and one that really resonated for me from day one of dailies is when the woman who plays the wife, Yeti Han, is greeting her grandmother for the first time. Technically there was some geography and timing questions which we had to solve. Just because like trying to get grandma to the door, faster so that you're not waiting for her. And then Alan, was a little bit inconsistent in his blocking. So he's the one who plays the little boy. And so, but beyond the technical stuff that we had to sort of finesse, it was Yeri's performance, which encapsulated that longing. And like seeing it on screen of like her saying something as simple as when she sees her mom after all these years of separation, saying like, it must have been so hard for you to get here, right? It's such a simple statement, but like it encapsulates those years of separation. And when she did that read, I just started breaking down in tears because I was just like, I know what that feels like. I know I've witnessed it in my own parents, being separated from their brothers or not being able to go back for the death of a relative, for visa reasons or whatever. Like that longing and that sort of recognition of that was something that really just hit home. And so it became my favorite scene because I just wanted to honor that performance, the truth of what she was conveying there. And it's also like your introduction to Yoon Jung, who's just such a blessing for all of us, in that film. And, she brings that kind of lightness, that humor, that informality right away. She's just like, what, did you miss me that much? Like there's that kind of, irascible quality that she has. And it just feels like the film immediately pivots into this totally different direction. And so it was a really, really fun scene to edit.
And it's interesting because she comes in sort of late, like it doesn't feel, she's not in the first few scenes and she comes in and we think we're going sort of down this one route of the film. And so with that sort of, slower edit style, did you receive, again, did you see the block, shot listing beforehand or?
To some extent, I think, when they were in locations that they needed to wrap out of, for example, all of the scenes that you see in that chicken hatchery, like those were all shot in one day. I mean, which is, seems so impossible that they did that. But I mean, that's a testament to Isaac and Lachlan Milne, who was our incredible cinematographer, the kind of planning and the inventiveness that they had. And so, so there was limited coverage through the whole movie, but I never felt like there was anything missing. I think there was some kind of a spontaneity and inventiveness that we needed to do to contract certain scenes, to steal like, a shot of just a window, for example, as a placeholder for a morning, because it was really hard for them to get sort of establishing exteriors and stuff like that, or to steal like, a shot that, of the house at night, the one house at night, and then add a zoom to it in order to, a pull out to it to give a sense of like lingering after grandma sings the Minari song for Alan's character. So things like that, we had to sort of innovate a little bit, but in general, yeah, I mean, we always had everything we needed.
Sophia asked, the most impressive or interesting way a script has to get to you or the project. I guess when you're reading I'm going to paraphrase Sophia, sorry, but when you're first reading a script, are you like, okay, I want to do a different genre now, because you're at this place now that you can choose, or is it the actual script that you're like, wow, I've got to do this?
It's always the script. It's always the script, because that's sort of the calling card that all projects have, whether it's a TV show or a feature or a short. It's almost always the script. Nowadays, because I have an agent now, like almost everything comes through that agent. But one of the wonderful things about having spent, over a decade coming up as a PA and as an assistant editor and VFX editor is that I have a wide network of people, producers, directors, people who were, junior people when I was a junior person. Like, for example, like one of the wonderful things was to be reunited with Chris Russell, who was like a lower level exec when we were working on Mr. McGorham's Wonder Emporium together, right? And I was literally, his job was to receive and distribute dailies to other executives. And I was an assistant editor. And then we reunited on Marvel. He's now the head of feature post at Marvel. And so like that, I tell that to everybody, is like, you never know where somebody's going to be. And so like, I think it's really important to let your personality shine, to never burn bridges, to sort of be respectful and kind to everybody that you work with. I mean, just because it makes your life better, but also it's just good business too. You always want to leave people with a really positive impression. The weirdest way a script got to me was somebody stopped me at Whole Foods and said, hey, are you Harry Yoon, the editor? And this was at the time when like, I hadn't edited anything like that was like really big. And so the whole time I thought my friend was punking me. And so like, I kept like looking over someone's shoulder to be like, okay, who's doing this? Who's doing this? And I went along and I was kind of snarky with it, but it actually turned out that like, he recognized me from some photo, where at Sundance or something like that. And we started talking and he had a great script. And so, we ended up having lunch and reading his script together. So sometimes Whole Foods, yeah.
Stalk people, exactly. That's one way to get your crew. Lubov, I'm sorry if I bastardized your name. This is a good question. What made you understand that you wanted to be an editor? What made you understand you wanted to be an editor?
It's a great question. When I actually started editing relatively late in life. So it was after I was back and forth in terms of my decision. And I was in San Francisco working in technology as a product manager and really missing film. And, I actually ended up talking to a therapist and, and I was like, I want to go down, but to LA to start my career over. And, but I'm a little hesitant to do it as an editor, even though I love the process, because it just doesn't feel like it's big enough. It doesn't feel like I'll have control and all of that stuff. And, she said that I think you have to where are you happiest? How are you most creative? And I said like, well, it's not so much in generating my own ideas. It's like taking somebody's idea and making it better. I'm really good at that. She said, you have to start embracing the nature of your creativity. And this was San Francisco, so there was a little bit of a hippiness in the answer. So she's just like, there are cultures where collaborative creativity, versus individual creativity is the mode of creation. It's honored in those cultures. Break out of your sort of like Western box, in thinking that you have to be, a solo artist, suffering and cutting your ear off somewhere, like, you know what I mean? Like, open up your mind to other possibilities. And that really, really helped me to really embrace the fact that like my creativity is one of nurturing. It's one of collaboration. It's not where, it has to be my way or the highway. In fact, it's the opposite. It's like, how do we get you to the place where you want to go? And I really started to embrace that. And that plus my computer and technical background seemed like really, really good starting places for restarting my career as an editor.
Is it challenging to have people behind you talking to the back of your head?
No, you get used to it. I mean, you get used to it. Like you get used to multitasking. And so you could be doing something and then you're also listening to a conversation. So, I think your animal brain gets to a certain level of dexterity as you cut thousands of scenes where you could be doing something and then also hearing what someone's saying. You also really get really good at reading the room, like you have a sense when somebody's not comfortable. You have a sense when maybe you've pushed too far in terms of a comment or something. And so you have to reestablish that trust. Editing is about trust. It's not just about, good ideas. It's about creating a bond of trust with whoever you're working with, that they feel like you're on the same side as they are and facing the problem together. And therefore, they can be vulnerable. They can suggest bad ideas. They can, they cannot be at their best and you're still going to be with them. You're not going to be judging them. In fact, you're trying to create an environment in which they can be the most comfortable, because that's when the most interesting creative ideas happen, is when you create that kind of bower of safety as an editor.
Well, it's interesting you brought up therapy, because sometimes being in an edit room is similar to like, because you're in a darkened room and,
Totally.
and you're showing, and any work that anyone does in creativity is part of themselves on that screen.
Absolutely. And it's often some of the most personal stuff, right? Like, I think good filmmaking is always personal, right? It's not just like, oh, I had an idea and I want to pursue it because it's interesting. Great filmmaking is always like some part of that director's life or emotion or story or soul is on the screen. And, you have to be careful with that.
And what's beautiful is what you talked about is also you were, as you're talking about the character Minari, you were on the screen as well, because
Absolutely.
And
and you have to find some way into it, right? Like if you're going to be a good filmmaker, if you're going to be a good collaborator, you have to believe in it and love those characters as much as, the person you're working with. So yeah, absolutely. That's what made Minari such a special project. Was I was as invested in the story and knew the details of the story as intimately as anyone else, just because that was the story of my family. I mean, not in Arkansas. We were in Oakland, but it's very, very similar. Yeah.
it must have been super satisfying to carry that all the way through.
Oh, I told my wife afterwards, like, even if I don't get to work on anything else, like, it will have all been worth it, because I got a chance to, help tell this story for my community. And, I think showing that to my parents and understanding how it might honor their experience and our family's experience was one of the most deeply satisfying things that I've ever experienced, in my life. So yeah, I'm so, so grateful for that, for what's happening there. And also now in Shang-Chi, like understanding that there's all these like little kids that are seeing, an Asian American superhero, on screen, and seeing him and Katie be part of the Marvel universe. That's incredibly gratifying too.
That's super exciting. Where can people, if they wanted to not, obsess about you in Whole Foods, but where could they look at your work, or do you do Instagram or anything like that?
Yeah, I mean, I'm on Instagram. You could Google me. And I also am one of the ambassadors for a sort of advice giving site called SideTime. So it's sidetime.com. And you could look up all these different filmmakers, directors, writers, producers, editors, etc. And then a lot of them are have phone calls with you on a per minute basis. And many of us are sort of raising money for good causes. So I'm raising money for the Sundance Institute with all of my calls. And so, if there's a very specific question you have, you could always try to reach me on sidetime.com.
It's called Sidetime.
SIDTIME. Yeah. .com.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, well, got everyone, you can stalk Harry there. And here we go. Thank you, Charlie, for putting that up. And so we're at the end of our time. This has been amazing, Harry. You really, what is the saying? My mother would say, he's as nice as he is pretty.
Liz, I feel the same way. Thank you so much. Your questions were amazing. And thank you, everybody who came today. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you, New York Film Academy, for the 2020 series. And everyone, have a great rest of your week. Bye.
Bye.